11 officers shot, 4 dead, snipers fire on downtown protest. And that, of course, is outdated news already. And this is now worldwide international news. The top of Google Japanese news. Keikon Juichi nin Utawa Gonin Shibo, 11 police officers struck, 5 dead. So the body count is continuing to rise. But there you go. Again, this is a developing story. All sorts of information is coming out. I'll just throw in a link in the show notes for this to this Reddit post that has all of these various different videos that were shot on the scene by various people that you can start perusing and going through. And I do hope that Corbett Report members will leave their comments and start parsing through this data as it comes in and as we start to learn more. But as I say, pretty much anything I say at this point is going to be outdated by the time this video gets to you. So I just want to offer initial thoughts about what's happening here. And this really sends me back at least to February of 2014. You might remember the Ukraine sniper crisis massacre on February 22nd of 2014, where there was the Maidan protests, and then we had those sniper incidents where the snipers killed a bunch of protesters, and this, of course, created the legitimacy for the Maidan government that was then installed, because it was alleged that Yanukovych's government had security forces had been firing on the protesters. It later came out from a number of different sources. Even the Estonian foreign minister, Urmas Paet, was caught in a telephone call that got leaked online, saying that he had been told snipers responsible for killing police and civilians in Kiev last month were protest movement provocateurs rather than supporters of then-President Viktor Yanukovych, i.e. it was the Maidan people associated with the Maidan movement itself that were killing the Maidan people themselves and officers, shooting in both directions, killing both sides, just to fan the flames of chaos and to make the situation more chaotic. There's more information on that from a couple of sources. William Engdahl did some great research on this. Ukraine's secretive neo-Nazi military organization involved in Euromaidan sniper shootings, where he notes, the question unanswered until now is who deployed the snipers. According to veteran U.S. intelligence sources, the snipers came from an ultra-right-wing military organization known as Ukrainian National Assembly, Ukrainian People's Self-Defense, UNSO. And he goes on to note that ever since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the crack paramilitary UNSO members have been behind every revolt against Russian influence. The one connecting thread in their violent campaigns is always anti-Russia. The organization, according to veteran U.S. intelligence sources, is part of a secret NATO Gladio organization and not a Ukraine nationalist group as portrayed in Western media. So there you go. The ultimately sourcing back to NATO Gladio operations, which should be no surprise, I'm sure, to my regular listeners. Of course, I'll throw in the link to more about Gladio B in case this is the first time you're hearing about this idea of rallying forces to create chaos and blow things up and blame them on political enemies for convenience sake. And this is remarkably similar again to what happened 5 years ago in Syria at the start of the so-called protest movement that kicked off what we see happening in Syria now. This really started in earnest in Daraa in March of 2011, where, again, there was sniper fire all of a sudden. In these peaceful protests, suddenly there were snipers, there were people being killed, 7 police officers killed in these protests for democracy against the Assad government, right? Well, again, there's a lot of information to indicate that no, it was not a protest movement. It was a pretext for a U.S. NATO-Israeli humanitarian intervention. And a lot of information of that in this article, which again I'll put in the show notes. And again on the Maidan snipers, there's a study from earlier this year proving Maidan snipers were Western-backed opposition false flag. A pretty provocative headline from Sputnik, so obviously a source with its own agenda, but still worth reading about that report. And University of Ottawa political science professor who studied eyewitness reports, estimates of ballistic trajectories, 30 gigabytes of radio intercepts, 5,000 photos, and 1,500 videos and broadcast recordings of the deaths, to come to his conclusion that in fact it was not the then government security forces, it was the protesters or protester-linked groups that were doing the shooting. Now, all of this, again, the question might be, why? Why would they do this? Why would they fan these flames? Of course, it is because you can't break an egg without making omelets, and you can't create order without creating chaos. And this is the chaos. And I've been talking about this. If you've been listening to me or watching me or reading the Corbett Report over the last several months, I've been talking about this more and more. Civil War II, the long hot summer. 2016, Community or Civil War was the first editorial I wrote this year. And unfortunately, that looks like it's coming true on the front pages of the New York Post, and I'm sure many other newspapers and outlets today. Civil War on the front pages of the newspaper. This is not pretty. It does not end well. This is not pleasant. We are entering a time of divide and conquer, and this is absolutely the divide side of the equation. It's Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter versus SJWs versus white nationalists versus feminists versus anti-feminists versus hate your neighbor is the order of the day, and transgender bathrooms and stories like that get pressing front page attention every single day to make people rage click, to keep the cycle of violence and hatred growing and going and growing and going until people are at each other's throats and never, ever mention the powers that shouldn't be, the string pullers, the financiers, the Bilderbergers, the people at the top of this pyramid who are pushing these buttons and, engineering a civil war. And this brings me back to what I talked about with David Friedman earlier this year in our conversation on The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. He noted the social contract is not really like a contract, it's more like a peace treaty between warring members of society. There are always going to be factions within a society. They're going to be in tension and in struggle and conflict, and in order to stop them from outright just going and killing each other, they form a peace treaty of sorts around a quote-unquote social contract, and they agree we'll abide by this political system, and you can have your turn in power and we'll have our turn. Well, that peace treaty, if that's indeed what this social compact is breaking down. In the United States, certainly. In various parts of Europe, the flames are being fanned, and here in East Asia, again, I can see the rising flames of nationalism and hatred and vitriol and militarism all coming together. And this is not a pretty sight. It doesn't end well for anyone, but we'll be here documenting it. So again, I hope that you will go and leave your comments in the comment section if you have breaking news, updates, analysis. Let's start collating the data, and we'll start